Hello everyone, I'm Tony Damian.
And I'm Andrew Rich.
And welcome to another edition of Himalayan Bites. Today we'll be talking about reforms to the scheme of arrangement process. Andrew, we've been talking about reforming the scheme process literally for decades. People might remember that last year there was a debate about whether schemes ought to stay in the courts or move to the takeovers panel. That debate was had and the conclusion was they are staying in the courts. But what everyone in that debate did agree was that the process had become a little inefficient, doing a few things it didn't need to do. But very happily, Andrew, Justice Jackman has solved a lot of that.
He sure has, Tony. It was in the recently announced VITA practice management scheme of arrangement, a relatively small one at $20-odd million. But Justice Jackman, being new to the federal court and previously one of the country's leading scheme of arrangement barristers, took the opportunity to lay out his vision for the way schemes of arrangement should be run going forward. In particular, he set aside a number of the layers of paperwork that have built up over the years. He's made it clear that he considers that a lot of that is just unnecessary, and it's hard to disagree with a lot of that, Tony.
Well, things, my old favourite, as you know, Andrew, the newspaper advertisement, you had to put an ad in a newspaper and put evidence on about it, and all of that was cost and paper and cost and paper. The chairman's affidavits, you had to put on an affidavit from the chairman that he or she was prepared to be the chairman of the meeting. I mean, of course they would do that. And then not only that, the person who would be the alternate chairman had to put on an affidavit as well. All this stuff was nuts, Andrew.
It was just ridiculous, Tony. Justice Jackman has decided that going forward, no longer do we need a couple of thousand pages of evidence before the court. He just wants to see 3 affidavits. Nice and simple, nice and streamlined. That'll allow us to cut straight to the real issues at the court hearing, Tony. It'll also mean there'll be significant cost savings going forward for scheme participants. Justice Jackman has stressed the importance of the need for practitioners to continue to draw to the court's attention anything that might be relevant to the court. So that very important safeguard remains. Justice Jackman has also indicated that if there is certain information that is material and new, the court will still expect to see that information. However, if the parties are just looking to put out a presentation or do a supplementary mail out, which really just repeats the information in the scheme booklet, the court does not need to be troubled with that. Similarly, call centre scripts that just repeat the information in the scheme booklet, the court does not need to be troubled with that information.
The reason that Justice Jackman is able to make these reforms is that when we looked into it, most of the process wasn't from the Corporations Act, it wasn't from the corporation's regulations, it wasn't from the court rules, it was judges saying you ought to have this, and then someone adds this, and then someone adds that, and before we knew it, we're out here when we should have been about here. So that's what I think has allowed Justice Jackman to do what he's done.
Importantly, Justice Jackman, in pronouncing the reforms, made it very clear that he had consulted widely within the federal court, and the other judges in the federal court are on board. And we recently saw, just this week, Tony, an example of that. We saw in the Oz Minerals BHP scheme down in Victoria that Justice Beach was adopting Justice Jackman's reform proposals.
It does leave open one final question, Andrew. That's the federal court. How do you think the Supreme Courts around the country will respond to this development?
That's a very good question, Tony. What we've seen around the country is a consistent approach from the various courts, a sensible, consistent approach. So personally, I'm expecting the various state Supreme Courts around the country to embrace these changes as well.
Yeah, and I think in that way, the federal court and Justice Jackman in particular have led the way here, and that will allow perhaps some of the Supreme Courts that may have been thinking about this or wanted to go down this path, it gives them a licence to do so, I think.
Very much so. So in short, the message is Justice Jackman is to be commended for his initiative. I think there's universal acceptance amongst practitioners that this is a really, really good development in Australia. And going forward, we're going to see much more streamlined scheme processes where we cut straight to the key issues.
Thanks for watching, and in our next episode, we'll be covering the proposed reforms of the ACCC to the merger clearance process.